much for this interview, for your time.
Thank you for having me on your show.
So, as we were talking about the bookstore's name for us, Gandhi honoring your grandfather, his lessons, it's now 150 years since he was born. What do you think, besides the teachings of nonviolence, is the most difficult? Which is the most difficult lesson people haven't really understood?
I think they haven't understood the philosophy of nonviolence. Many people that I've talked to, they think nonviolence is the absence of war or absence of violence in the street. But grandfather taught me that we commit violence in many ways, not just the physical violence, but we commit a lot of passive violence. Violence where we don't use any physical force against people, but we hurt people by our actions, like discrimination and oppression and exploitation and all of these things that we do to one another all the time, and wasting resources and over consuming resources. So all of these things are acts of violence, but we have not been taught to look at them as violence, so we don't even recognize them as committing violence. What grandfather said is that all of us commit this violence, passive violence, all the time, and that generates anger in the victim, and the victim then resorts to physical violence to get justice. So it is passive violence that fuels the fire of physical violence. So logically, if we want to put out that fire of physical violence, we have to cut off the fuel supply. And since the fuel supply comes from each one of us, we have to become the change we wish to see in the world.
But it's a tricky thing because the system is.
Yeah, we have got grabbed in this whole system, and we become part of it, and so now we don't know how to get out of it. But yeah, a system is a system. We can't become a slave to that system. We have to realize that there is more to life than just going in circles doing the same thing over and over again. Um, our life should be meaningful. Our life should um, uh, make society better by our presence there. So, if we have this idea in our life, um, then life would become more meaningful, and we can do the right thing there. And then we don't uh, find the system to be controlling us.
And I was thinking from your book, El Don de la Ira in Spanish, how so we live in a planet full of contrasts.
Mm.
How the system is so fearful of non-violence. How can something that could feel so subtle enrage so much that system? It's, for example, now with the we have manifestations all over the world happening in every continent, almost. But the thing is, the social media and the media have been saying they're not peaceful. So the enemy is also within the means of communication that we have.
Mm.
Because, but I guess what I'm trying to say is, as like you were explaining, that the change has to come within. So if you can't see the peace outside, it's because you don't have it. You know?
Yeah,
You have to get it and understand it really.
exactly. If we understand the philosophy, if we understand what we mean by peace, then it'll be easier for us to do something. Today, we don't understand the philosophy, we don't even understand what we mean by peace. When I ask people, what do you mean by peace? And they said, well, no war. If we are not at war, we are at peace. or if there is no violence in our streets, we are living in peace. And I said, that's not true, because we are committing violence in many ways. So once we know that and recognize it, then we can do something about it. But if we are ignorant about it, we can't change anything. So it's very important for us to learn about these things and understand it. Then we can make the changes that we want to see in our world.
And for example, meditation helps.
Meditation helps a lot because that is how we can turn our uh, gaze inwards and look at ourselves, look at our life, examine our life. What are we doing? Are we going in the right path or not? And if we need to make corrections, how do we do it? And so on. If we do that regularly, then we can be on the path, in the right path. But if we don't do that, then we are going from here to there and just going round in circles sometimes.
And in your book, you mentioned about using anger in a right way.
Yeah.
Like, can you explain us the nice analogy or metaphor that your grandfather taught you?
Yeah, I was very angry when I grew up in South Africa, and I became a victim of all the hate and prejudice from the whites and the blacks, and I wanted to fight back again. And that is when my grandfather taught me that anger is like electricity. He said it's just as useful and just as powerful, but only if we use it intelligently. But it can be just as deadly and destructive if we abuse it. So just as we channel electricity and bring it into our lives and use it for the good of humanity, we must learn to channel anger in the same way so that we can use that energy for the good of humanity rather than for destroying things. And that is, when we train ourselves to do that, and to be able to train ourselves to do the right thing, we need to have control over our minds. Today, we don't have any control over our mind because we do a lot of physical exercises, we have a healthy body, but we never do any mental exercises for a strong mind. And he made me do this exercise every day. Sit quietly in a room for a few minutes, keep something in front of me and focus on that for 1 minute, and then close my eyes and see how long I can keep that image in my mind. In the beginning, I found that the moment I closed my eyes, the image vanished. But when I began to do this regularly every day, I found that I could keep that image longer and longer in my mind. And to that extent, my mind was coming under my control. So when I faced a crisis, my mind didn't go berserk. When we get angry, when we face a crisis, we get angry, and then we lose control over our mind, and we say things and do things that change our life sometimes.
Yes.
So when you have control over your mind, you can stop yourself from doing wrong things.
Exactly. And I really want to go further into that, in the power of the mind and ego. As you said, we I don't know if from all the people you meet all around the world, do you see how do you see the young people? Are they're keen on training or knowing the inward path, or just like manifest themselves and see how it goes and try something that we know it doesn't work?
Well, unfortunately, what is happening with the young people today is they're getting little bits of information from people, and so they have the idea that as long as they don't hurt people, as long as they don't fight violently, they are non-violent, and they go out into the streets and protest and do all those things. But they show so much anger in them, and they don't know that they have to stop that anger. And the important thing about nonviolence is that we don't have any enemies. We have misguided friends, and we want to bring those friends back into the right path. But the moment we, classify people as enemies, then we are making the first big mistake.
And that's part of separation.
Yeah, yeah.
And
So we want to transform a friend, not fight an enemy.
And do you think it's I try to meditate and so on, and I think what you're saying is really important, and we in the magazine and try always to communicate that kind of power with of the energy, because if you have like this fuel within you,
Mm.
it's almost as like law of attraction will bring you that,
Right,
when you
right.
create more of that.
Yeah.
So it's what I was thinking by reading your book of how you are excited, promoting people to create and not to react.
Mm.
But in order to create, there are certain paths, certain steps we have to take to get there. So as your grandfather told you to keep a diary, a journal of your feelings. That will be something good for people to start working on.
Yes, yes, we need to keep a journal of our feelings, and not just keep a journal, but we need to keep it with a positive attitude. We need to find, if there's a problem there, we need to find a solution to that problem. And the solution should be something that is acceptable to all parties concerned, not just to you, for your benefit. So we have to be truthful, we have to be honest, and we have to keep a journal so that we can work on these problems.
And I really like the idea of one of your grandfather's teachings about that we are one family, we all are family. And so I think just because of Mandela also being incarcerated in the same jail as your grandfather, how I would also like to talk about how the power of one, your grandfather influenced him, and those movements came to North America and other parts of the world. So as so it's now 1 years now that since he was shot. So how, from being a young teenager with him until now, how do you see his lessons, and also within your family to have that heritage? How does it feel?
Well, I must be honest and tell you that when I was a young boy, I felt the legacy to be a very heavy burden, because people had very high expectations, and all the time they were trying to compare me with my grandfather. And one day I told my grandmother, I said, I don't know how I'm going to go through life with this legacy, because it's already becoming heavy for me. And she said that it's up to you. If you consider this legacy to be a burden, it's just going to get heavier and heavier. But if you consider this legacy to be a light that is showing you the path ahead, it'll be easier for you to deal with it.
How do you feel about the burden right now?
Now I look at it as a light, and the light is showing me the right path,
And you feel
and I feel happy.
happy. Thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.